Let's start with some news around various aspects of the Olympic Games with Mark Watson, who I'm sure is getting very nervous ahead of this triathlon, or triathlons. There's two of them. I hope, Mark, very good afternoon to you, that we're going to see some triathlons today. Are you absolutely sure we will? I hope it's not raining in Paris at the moment.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shambles. It's a bit of a shambles, isn't it, Brendan? And good afternoon to you and your listeners. I'm actually nervous. I'm up in Seine at the moment. I'm about to do a 4K ocean water swim race. So I'm just up on the island of Seine, and I'm up here actually. You might remember an Olympian from 1992, Leslie Morton. She is up here, ran the 10,000 metres, and also a cyclist by the name of Tony Bradshaw, who represented New Zealand in the women's road race at the Commonwealth Games in 2006. So we're all up here swimming, Brendan, but then looking forward to the countdown tonight to watch that triathlon, assuming it does go ahead. And let's hope it goes ahead in its full discipline and its full capacity of a 1,500 metre swim, a 40-kilometre bike ride and a 10-kilometre run.
Okay, I've just made the point in our introduction. I wonder how many of these athletes in the men's triathlon have started an international triathlon of great significance, which this one clearly is, at 10:45 in the morning. So they'll be running, won't they, somewhere around about between 12 and 12:30 in temperatures. It could be in the high 30s.
Yeah, but look, I don't think that's an excuse. I mean, millions are put into these high-performance programs. You generally get a pretty good understanding of the times that these races are going to take place. Heat's not an excuse. I always find it quite funny when athletes turn up to these hot countries for the Olympics and then complain about the heat. I mean, you go and acclimatise, you go and show your body and training what happens on race day. You know, the body has this natural ability to shut down, say, after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's why a lot of countries have siestas. Now, there's a lot of races and World Cups that are held maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you've got to shift the body. You've got to make it the adjustment. You've got to say, right, all my swim sessions in the lead up to these Olympic Games are going to be done at 10:30 in the morning. We're going to mirror it. And look, I remember being with Mark Elliott in the 2008.
Now, Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I hear what you're saying. That they've got to adjust and make adjustments in their programs, but no one had any idea at all up until a week ago that all of this training they were doing at those early hours of the morning was irrelevant because the event was starting late. I mean, if you haven't had time to adjust your body, which none of these people have had, aren't some of them going to be at a big disadvantage?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, and then based on that, and that's a fair point too, Brendan, then based on that, look, it's economies of scale, isn't it? It's everybody's in the same boat. It's not ideal, but everybody is in the same boat. Look, it's, I mean, I don't know, there's been rumours and speculation around the water quality for a long, long time. I'm not sure whether or not the plan B or the alternative plan was put out at any point to any of the athletes suggesting, look, if this does happen, this is the day the race will happen, this is the substitute day, this is the day over. I mean, sometimes they do let athletes know, look, if we can't race today, we will race the next day. Yeah,
well, they can hardly do that. Look, they may not be able to do it in the So was it realistic that this thing could have been reduced to a duathlon?
Yeah, look, they have done it previously, which would have made a bit of a mockery of it. It would have certainly suited Hayden Wilde and Alex Yee, the two favourites, because if there is a slight weakness, it's their swim. Hamish Carter always said it, you know, the better he was running, the worse he was swimming. And you can't win the race in the swim, but you can certainly lose it. You know, you can't afford to be any more than about 45 seconds down out of that swim, or you're going to find yourself in a world of trouble. And as you know, Brendan, it's a taught sport. It's a technique-based sport. The likes of Hayden Wilde have had to learn the game, very well coached by Liz Van Wheelie down there out of Tauranga. But, you know, he's had to put a lot of work into it. And so, look, it would suit him. But I know how much work he's put into his swim. And that'll be the interesting thing with this race. I mean, in Tokyo, Alex Yee and Hayden were a little bit back on the main group. No one really attacked on the bike at all. And it just gave those guys their opportunity to make any catch-up, play any catch-up they needed to, got into the main bunch, and as they say, it just became a running race. You know, if you're wanting to beat Alex Yee and Hayden Wilde tonight and you get out of that swim and you've got to jump, you've got to take 3 or 4 guys and just go. You can't afford to hesitate. You might have to be the one that takes the initiative, Brendan, and just get 3 or 4 working collectively together, because if it does come back together on the flat streets of Paris, it will just end up being a foot race. And, you know, when you look at the times on paper, Yee, Wild, I mean, there's probably 4 or 5 that potentially could win the medals.
I presume also it'll mean a change, obviously, in, for example, the 24 hours prior to the start of a
Correct.
triathlon where your diet and your food intake is all carefully kind of managed for certain times to make sure that you've got enough energy when you get there, but also, that you haven't gone too long without food. So adjustments have to be made also off the water, don't they, for this race now?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And right down to your taper. I mean, I know different athletes might have a day off completely before a race. Some might have a day off completely 2 days before the race and train the day before lightly. So everyone will have a slightly different lead into this, which would have meant yesterday, yes, they would have had to have done something differently again. So they would have tapered to, those those tapering protocols leading into a race are just that established now. And every athlete is different. It's no different than warm-up protocols. Every athlete will have their well-established protocols for warming up prior to an event like this. So, they would have had to make that adjustment, an extra 24 hours, probably some active recovery, probably just a little bit of movement, just ticking over. There's a danger that you can, 2 days of doing nothing, your sort of body starts to shut down a little bit and your nervous system can become a little bit flat. So they'll be working with their coaches. It'll be harder for those athletes, maybe still in their infancy, if I can use that term at this level. Maybe those athletes at their first Olympic Games might just maybe not cope with it as well as maybe some of the more hardened pros. But I just sort of sense with Hayden Wilde particularly, nothing really phases this guy, mate. He's a racer and he is as tough and as hard as they come. So I think, what you're suggesting, I think those peripheral things could have a huge impact on some athletes. I'm confident it won't have an impact on Hayden Wilde.
So will they be watching each other, I suppose, for the whole race, won't they, those two, Yee and Wilde?
Yeah, and look, Hayden's going to have to do something different. Very well coached by Craig Kirkwood. Hayden's basically, he's not far outside of qualifying for New Zealand in the 5,000 metres. The guy's run 13:23 for 5K.
Wow.
He's a 28. I'm not sure if he's snuck under 28 minutes or not for 10K, but he's right there. This guy is a class act.
So he's got a better run. He's got a better run than you.
No, well, that's the thing. No, I think Alex, you might have gone even quicker, to be honest. That's the scary damn thing. So what's historically happened every time these guys have raced, they've just raced together. It's come down to the last 300 or 400 metres and Alex Yee's basically outkicked him. So look, a scenario here is he's going to need to change it up. He's going to need to look to maybe attack at the 7K mark. He is going to need to do something differently. He is going to he cannot just allow this to be this sort of high aerobic threshold, or sort of what we would call anaerobic threshold type pace. He's got to mix it up. He's got to put a little bit of pressure on Alex Yee. I mean, early on, they'll get a bit of a sense of how they're feeling. They'll get a little bit of a sense. There might be a bit of psychological games going on, looking at body language. Is anybody just wanting to maybe talk and just see if they get some sort of reaction. But from what I've seen, both athletes are very good. You wouldn't play them in poker. They've got wonderful poker faces. They show nothing and they give nothing. But Alex Yee probably has the psychological edge over Hayden. Every time they have raced, as good as Hayden been, Alex Yee's beaten him. So it's a bit of a mental block. It's a bit of a hurdle there for Hayden, to be honest.
What about the women's race? What are you expecting there?
Not expecting too much from our two girls. Look, if I'm to be perfectly honest, they're top 30 in the world. They're not top 15. I think the relay these days has probably meant a slightly weaker selection criteria in regards to the girls that actually get to race the individual race. Certainly gone are the days of, your Debbie Tanners, your Nikki Samuels, your Andrea Hewitts, and that golden era. Look, if I'm Nicole van der Kay and stuff, I'm racing conservatively and just going to save everything I've got for the team relay, because that's realistically the only outside chance that you've got, in my opinion, of getting top 5, top 6. I mean, I don't even rate them in the relay, to be honest, Brendan. I don't. I know they got recently third at World Championships, but you've only got to go and look through the teams who wasn't there. But look, it's nothing against them. I mean, they're just following the criteria.
When is the relay?
Being picked. Well, it's normally about 3 or 4 days after the individual race. So I would expect it's on the weekend, Brendan, to be honest. I don't actually have the schedule in front of me. But it normally follows. I mean, you don't want to take the edge off the individual race. And if you would have the relay first, then, because it's so sharp and short, 250 metre swim, 5K bike ride, 1,500 metre run for each athlete. I mean, that is just VO2 max. That is just high lactic tolerance. And, that would definitely take the edge off. But look, yeah, I wouldn't have too much expectation on the women's side of it today from a New Zealand point of view. But yeah, certainly settle back. I mean, you were there, Brendan, and when Telf, Carter.
I haven't won the Olympic Games. I got third one year, but I never won one. No, sorry, carry on.
No, but you commentated. Didn't you commentate with Chris Skemmel when they got gold and silver, didn't they? And
yeah.
I think me and you did, Brendan. I think me and you did Bevan Doherty when he won bronze 4 years later in Beijing, actually. So look, if Hayden Wilde wins tonight, he becomes our greatest ever triathlete. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
He surpasses Hamish. But then it's like anything, isn't it? It's like without the Hamish Carters, the Cameron Browns, the Rick Wells, the Aaron Bakers, and all of those, that wonderful history that we've got, whether it be at the Olympic distance or long distance, you do not have the likes of the Hayden Wilds, and they'll acknowledge that too.
Let's just move on to swimming briefly before we let you go.
Yeah, sure.
Disappointment, of course, with fair weather in Clare. What did you make of their swims?
I thought Erica Fairweather was superb.
Well, she was for the last 50.
Ran out of real estate, but she was always going to finish fourth in that race, Brendan, unfortunately. In fact, she got closer than I thought she would. I mean, you've arguably got the two greatest 400, I mean, Janet Evans maybe, but you've got, Ariana Titmus, now two-time Olympic champion, world record holder. You've got the most coveted and decorated swimmer in history in Kaylee Ledecky. And then a 16-year-old who's now a 17-year-old sensation who actually held the world record at 16, and Summer McIntosh of Canada. I thought Lewis Clareburt genuinely might medal. He's got a big race temperament. He has won Commonwealth Games, picked up medals at Commonwealth Games where no one expected in 2018. He's won the Commonwealth Games. He's won medals at World Championships. But after his heat, you just sensed that he just wasn't quite on. But to me, Brendan, I think there's an issue here with swimming. Like, it's certainly not through a lack of work ethic. And I was hearing your introduction. I mean, we sort of go to these Olympic Games with this expectation that all of our athletes somehow should medal. But every country in the world has those same expectations. We're just little old New Zealand. Every European country has a major swimming program. Look at the United States. You know this, Brendan, that if you used to they used to say that if you making the US swim team was harder than winning an Olympic medal. And, you look at the Australians and, you take 7 people and put them in a room, it's not a lot. And you take 4 people and put them in a room, it's not a lot. I mean, they're remarkable achievements, aren't they, really, when you look at it? But this is the thing for me, Brendan. So we go back to the World Championships earlier in the year in January, and we see Fairweather and Clareburt winning the World Championships. The Americans weren't there. The Australians weren't there. And you ask yourself why. Okay, it's Olympic gear. We don't think that's in the benefit of our athletes. So our athletes go and win world championships. And in 20 years' time, no one will remember who's there. They'll just say, hey, New Zealand won 2 gold medals and Fairweather will forever be a world champion, and so will Clareburt. The thing is, then we go and have our national championships, which are qualification, in the start of April. So we've had our athletes peak for the world championships, then come back and then try and peak again for qualification, and then go into this long build-up and try and peak again for the Olympics. Look at the Australians and the Americans did not do the World Championships, and their qualification for the Olympics is basically about 3 weeks out. And so they have one build-up, one peak. They get themselves in peak fitness for their own championships and their own qualification, and they just hold that because you can hold it for 6 weeks and bring it right through to the Olympic Games. So I just think we've got to look at the way we're doing things, the way we periodise, the way we plan. Why are we not doing what the Australians and Americans are doing? They are the leading swimming nations in the world. They're taking the guesswork out for us. Our athletes are having to peak 3 times. Their athletes are only peaking once, Brendan. And I do genuinely believe it's that I think is part of the reason why maybe Lewis Clareburt didn't quite perform. I think that's the area they need to address. I don't think it's got nothing to do with ability, Brendan.
No, but also I'm not totally convinced that an athlete of an elite nature like Clareburt is, he's right up there, obviously, in the top 8 in the world, and same with Fairweather. I don't think it's incomprehensible that they can't peak twice in a calendar year.
3 times they've been in the first 6 months of the year. So having to peak for the World Championships, then having a little bit of a break, then having to qualify and peak for the National Championships as qualification.
Yeah, they have
to qualify at that event, Brendan. They can't not qualify outside of it. They actually have to qualify that at event. They have to do it on the day.
That's the issue, isn't it? They should not. I mean, I don't know of any other sport. I mean, athletics, for example, one I'm more familiar with, but I'm sure it's the same for other sports. As long as you meet a qualifying time, doesn't matter whether it's in the Kalahari Desert or Uzbekistan. But to say you've got to come back here, this has been the downfall of Kenyan athletes, or athletics to some degree. They insist that their athletes have to come back and compete at the Olympic trials in Kenya. And most of them are running around the world earning large sums of money and have to take time out, maybe a month, 6 weeks, to go through this process of peaking to run fast enough at their trials. And it's an odd thing. You want your best athletes to go to the games for sure.
But I mean, why are the Australians and the Americans only peaking once and building once? Why are their national championships closer? Why both the leading swim countries have pretty much exactly the same model, and there's a reason why they win. We're dealing in swimming with 0.0001% of performance. You saw it with Fairweather. You've seen it. I mean, we are talking the smallest of margins, the difference. And look, I think you're right, Eric. Fairweather clearly, I think, handled it pretty well. But I just wonder whether we need to look at some of that stuff. The other thing is, Brendan, they finished national championships in early April. And then they go into these long camps. No racing leading in either. You never see a 1,500 metre or a middle distance athlete going into these events without having raced, without having done Diamond League meets like Hamish Kerr's doing in the high jump and like Tom Walsh does. They just go into these camps and we see no racing. And, training is one thing, but as you know, you cannot simulate it. Nothing simulates a race like a race. And I think sometimes you've got to go and match fit. So I think they're the areas, the peripheral things that New Zealand swimming need to look at.
Let's finish on a positive note. I'm sure you enjoyed and were watching the Sevens this morning, and I imagine the local population up in Samoa would have been bathing in some reflected glory as well with that outstanding performance by our Black Ferns.
Yeah, look, wonderful, wasn't it? Wonderful. And that's what they can do, and that's what the Olympics does. It just gives us a real sense of nationalism. It just provides inspiration. You can be having a bit of a bad time at work, but for the next 24 hours, you're smiling. Look, Brendan, I was like maybe a lot of people when the Sevens came in 2016. I wasn't sure it needed to be there. And then someone actually said to me, look, if you look at the Olympic Games, there's an event for pretty much every continent and every country in the world that they can potentially target and potentially try and win a medal in. The one area of the world that wasn't available to was arguably the Pacific Islands. There was nothing really the Pacific Island nations, and they hadn't won medals other than, I think, was it Wolfgram that won a silver for maybe Samoa or Tonga, and there's been some boxers, but really. And then Sevens came along and suddenly Fiji, Samoa and these countries have a genuine medal they can focus on. They can actually genuinely get themselves on the podium consistent in the Olympics. And then I looked at the women's side and thought, but we don't really have a women's circuit. It's going to be a bit of a soft medal. And I think 2016 you could genuinely say that. I think 2016 you could say, look, we only had the Australians and we really only had the New Zealanders. But and I know, Brendan, the moment something becomes an Olympic sport, you just see this absolute proliferation. In fact, you just see this exponential curve of interest and suddenly just the resources chucked into it. And I remember going up to Coral Coast Sevens and watching a very average-looking Fijian women's team. They're now super competitive. Here are the Canadians. Here are the USA beating the Australians. That's right. Look at that. And suddenly you've got genuine depth, haven't you?
Look at that victory days this morning. I thought was highly significant for the medals for the women's sevens. New Zealand, America, Canada. Who could really have predicted a few years ago that the North American teams would dominate the medal table in rugby at the Olympic Games? I'd also say this much, at the risk of being accused of being sacrilegious, I don't think this applies to men's rugby, but I think in women's rugby, the highest form of an accolade, the peak of women's rugby, is a gold medal in sevens at the Olympic Games, because it's turned sevens rugby into a global sport. And the audience, for example, of that match this morning would have dwarfed 10 times over the number of viewers around the world who would have watched the Women's Rugby World Cup final a few years ago. I'm not trying to play down the significance of women's rugby and its World Cup. It's growing, and it is an important kind of point in the development of the game. But I think the ultimate accolade in women's rugby is at the Olympic Games. It doesn't apply to men. The Rugby World Cup will always dominate sevens rugby at every level, but I don't think that's the case anymore with women's rugby. What say you?
No, look, I agree. I mean, sevens was always going to be the global point of view, and it should still really be the global point of view. I don't think the IB allows it to be, but, you go back through the men's sevens tournaments over the years. I remember in Wellington, I think we had Kenya in a tournament, didn't we? We've had the United States, we've had Canada, we've had the Samoans, and we've got this eclectic mix of countries that potentially can win these sevens tournaments. And it's simple because it's fast. You don't have the complexities and the subtleties that go with the type 5 and the breakdown and all of these areas. I mean, we've been playing the United States in 15s for 100 years, and I think even a couple of years ago we went close to putting 100 points back on them. And yet, they potentially can tip us up with the likes of Carlin Isles years ago and potentially tip us up. So I think it's always been the global point of view. I still find it really frustrating, Brendan, and it's probably a debate for another day, that, here we are in Paris getting knocked out in the quarterfinals, and we've got Bowden Barrett sitting at home. We've got Artie Severe sitting at home.
Yep. No, I know. We've been debating this week. Home. Absolutely. This is a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call to New Zealand rugby, what's happened here, that no longer can you have this arrogant attitude and just send a group of young guys, no experience in rugby, haven't made their name in rugby at provincial level even, and you send them off to the Olympic Games, what now is a truly global sport, and we don't win.
But Brendan, if you're also going to attach, now I know they don't use it at the Olympics because they can't, but if you're going to attach the word All Black to our sevens team, then you've got a responsibility that goes with that brand. The All Black brand is about precision performance, no compromise. There's a thing about we win. Well, if you're going to franchise it, then you make sure your sevens teams gets those resources and wins. Because I can tell you this for a moment, having lived in Canada and Japan, when the sevens teams results are printed in the press, most people outside of those rugby playing nations haven't got a clue between the difference between sevens and 15s. They just see New Zealand getting beaten by Fiji, New Zealand getting beaten by Samoa, and they go, I thought the All Blacks were amazing. I thought the All Blacks were invincible. And what the New Zealand rugby just hasn't got, it actually diminishes your brand. It actually diminishes your status.
Well, it brings in a lot of money, so that's, I suppose, the inevitable thing. But, it's an interesting situation which they have to do something about. My theory, or my suggestion would be this, and I mentioned this to Justin Marshall yesterday, and he quite liked it, is I can't see why World Rugby can't take the cue on this issue from the ICC, who had to deal with this growing, developing, orphan child of cricket called T20, and particularly the IPL. So in the end, what the ICC have done is they have basically haven't scheduled any international cricket tours during the 6 weeks of the ICC. Why can't World Rugby do the same with international rugby? Once every 4 years, have their 6-week window so that these top players from all of these rugby countries have a chance to go to the Olympic Games. Anyway.
And look, I know sevens is its own sport, Brendan, to a degree, and it's evolved, but I'm sorry, Bowden Barrett and certain players wouldn't take long to come up to speed. I mean, Christian Cullen would fit in today's game as well as he did when he was playing both back in the day.
Yeah, anyway, mate, I'll let you go and get back to your joys in Samoa.
Swim, Brendan, swim. Yeah. 3 kilometres of hope, 1,000 metres of truth, Brendan. 4K, that's us, mate.
Yeah, I'll put it on my 5-year plan. Anyway, thank you, Mark.